Mr. President, over the past couple of months, we've seen a lot of efforts with regard to immigration reform, in particular to address the situation of the so-called DACA kids, or the dreamers, who were brought here through no fault of their own and are now protected, many of them, through the DACA program, but that those protections will run out on the 5th of March. In fact, some have lost their protections already, and so there is a great impetus and urgency to deal with this program. I've said from the beginning that in order to establish a long-term resolution and to provide regulatory certainty, that a true DACA fix must be a bipartisan solution. You know, over the past year, the two big items that this chamber and the Congress has dealt with, healthcare reform and tax policy, have been done under rules of reconciliation, meaning that if we could get a bare majority of Republican votes, that would be enough. If we could keep all the Republicans together. That is no longer the case with our approach to DACA. We're not under rules of reconciliation. It will require 60 votes, meaning that only a bipartisan solution will do. That's why I've been working on such a measure with my Republican and Democratic colleagues here in the Congress, as well as in the White House. As I've said repeatedly, I believe on this issue that the President's instincts are better than some of the advice that he gets. I truly believe that he does want a solution for these young immigrants. I hope that we can get there, and we'll have a meeting tomorrow at the White House, a bipartisan meeting, to try to get a little further down the road. Let me just stress, a lot of words are highly charged that are thrown around this immigration debate. No word is perhaps more highly charged than the word amnesty. That's been thrown around by a number of my colleagues. I would suggest that that is not the case here with the DACA kids. Amnesty, by definition, is an unconditional pardon for a breach of law. I don't think a child being brought across the border by the parents has committed a violation of the law, not the child. Certainly the parent, but not the child. And so to provide relief for those kids and to allow them to stay in the only country that they know, I don't think should be called an amnesty. Yet that highly charged phrase is often used, or word. To say or to suggest that anyone pursuing a bipartisan solution is proposing amnesty, I think is misleading, and it puts back the cause of actually trying to fix this situation. The proposal that we are drafting, this bipartisan group, offers a pathway to citizenship only for a specific group of young immigrants. As I mentioned, those who were brought here through no fault of their own. These are immigrants who are serving in the military, who are seeking education, who are holding good jobs, and they'll be required to continue to do so before they can have a chance to earn citizenship. Now, as for the parents of these young immigrants, nobody can deny the fact that they did break the law, and any bipartisan proposal on DACA cannot and will not reward them for this behavior. I agree with the President when he said that dealing with DACA is a very different subject, or difficult subject, but we must do so with heart. And I believe that that has been the case for those in this chamber who have tried for 16 years to get a solution for these kids. We have to prioritize border security measures, obviously, to determine which ones are sensible to include in the DACA measure. We will go beyond simply dealing with these DACA kids with some border security measures, but we have to find out which ones are sensible and make sense to include in this limited measure and table those that should be considered for the future. I have been part of comprehensive immigration reform efforts in the past. I look forward to be part of comprehensive immigration reform efforts later this year. But this is not that. We have a very specific purpose to achieve before the 5th of March. I believe, and the commitment that we got was to have a bipartisan bill on the Senate floor by January 31st. I believe we need to, in order to have enough runway to get this actually done by March 5th. The White House, after much urging on our part, finally sent a list over as to what they considered part, or should be considered part, of a border security plan. As I mentioned, many of these items need to be addressed. Maybe all the items need to be addressed, but they need to be addressed as part of a larger, more comprehensive effort, not the limited fix that we're going to do before March 5th. I'm all in when it comes to comprehensive immigration reform. I look forward to that debate, but we have to understand that we can't do it all before March 5th if we're going to protect these kids. And some will say that, well, we get to March 5th, if we can't do it, then we just kick the can down the road again with some other protection. I think the courts have made it clear that what was done prior to this, the DACA program itself, was not constitutional. And should we simply say we're going to extend that program now, it would be found unconstitutional by the courts. So this is a real deadline, and we've got to meet it. We've got to focus specifically on protecting these DACA recipients. I think Republicans and Democrats and the President all want this. The question is, are we going to, just over the next couple of weeks, talk about bigger, broader issues that need to be dealt with, but have no chance of being part of legislation? You know, back in 2013, I participated in what was called the Gang of Eight. We negotiated for 7 straight months, nearly every night when we were here in Washington. We, as members, negotiated, and our staffs did as well, much longer hours and into the weekends. Then we brought that piece of legislation to the Judiciary Committee, where we debated for a couple of weeks, I think amended it more than 100 times. Then we brought it to the House floor for another couple of weeks, amended it several more times before passing it by a vote of 68 to 32. That was a long process, hard-fought compromises in that legislation. To suggest that we can go through a similar effort in the next couple of weeks simply isn't going to happen. And so the list that the White House brought forward is simply something that we ought to consider for comprehensive reform, but not for this specific fix. With regard to the border itself, we all know that we need additional infrastructure on the border. I represent Arizona here. We have some 375 miles of border. Some of the border has good barriers in terms of fences. Some areas we have what could approximate a wall. The closest thing we have approximating a wall are these old landing strips from World War II that we put on their end and cemented in. They're opaque. You can't really see through them. We have them in a number of the communities along the border. We've been taking them out because they're not very effective, and been putting fences in place of them because we need to have visibility to the other side of the border. So most of what the President's talking about along the southern border is actually a fence. We do need more fences. In the Gang of Eight bill, I think we authorized 700 miles of additional and improved fencing. So nobody's suggesting that we don't need additional infrastructure or barriers on the border. The question is, how much do we provide for in this legislation? The President has made a request in the budget for about $1.6 billion for the coming year. I think that totals about 74, or will result in about 74 miles of fence between Texas and California. I think that that's a good place to start. How much we authorize going forward will be very much in debate. I know that during the campaign, the President talked long and hard about building a wall, but every time he mentioned building a wall, he talked about Mexico paying for it. We all know, and many of us knew at the time, that Mexico was not going to pay for that wall. They're not. That's why the President is asking for $18 billion of U.S. taxpayer money to fund that wall. So to suggest that that the president hasn't changed his position, and that we're dealing with a proposal that we've known is coming from the White House simply isn't true. It has changed. The president initially said that Mexico would pay for it. That's not the case. It's the U.S. taxpayer that's going to pay for any infrastructure on the border. That's as it should be. That's, if we're putting up the border fence, we ought to pay for it. But to suggest that nobody's changed their position is simply not true. Deals like this, where you need 60 votes, necessarily involve compromise. No party, no individual is going to get everything that they want. The White House won't get everything they want. The Democrats in Congress won't, and neither will the Republicans. This will be a compromise. I'm simply suggesting tonight that let's get real about the time involved between now and when we have to fix this, and not to think that we can simply kick the can down the road and put in some temporary fix, some kind of bridge later that will protect these kids. Those protections will run out on March 5th and may be good, or may be done at that point. So let's get serious, Mr. President. Let's all get serious, Republicans and Democrats, not coming forward to the table with unrealistic expectations about what can be done and what can be part of this legislation. Let's have something that we can put on the Senate floor by the end of the month to leave sufficient time to get this fixed by March 5th. So I hope that we can all work together on this, Republicans and Democrats. And with that, I yield the floor.